Good morning again, everyone. We've been talking about the cycle of loving your neighbors, loving God, moving them to loving God. These are the greatest commandments. We just talked about this in class. Whenever Jesus had the Samaritan woman truly fall in love with God. And she went and couldn't help but to tell other people that she met the Messiah. And they came to believe because of her testimony. And then they listened to Jesus and they said, it's no longer because of your testimony, but it's because we've heard him and we know that he's the Messiah. God works in people's lives whenever we move them to love him and then move them to serve others. Christianity is not just about loving God and kind of minding our own business. It's about serving other people and helping other people who are in need. Our theme this year is God first, and our theme verse is Deuteronomy 6:7. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. It's about continually sharing the commandments with our children, teaching our children's children, and on and on and on. We have a major deficit right now of biblical literacy in this nation. People are not teaching their children, and their children aren't teaching their children, and it's a big problem. And so this theme is really important, to put God first in all that we do and to teach his commandments to our children. This quarter we're talking about God and work. We're about to finish this up, but we're talking about how do we put our faith into action. How do we connect with God through the works that we do for other people? Something that's kind of interesting, you may not know this. I've been like walking this fine line today. Like I bring things up, and I'm like, I don't want to get into politics. I don't want to talk anything political, and I stick to that. So I don't want your mind to go there, but I find it interesting that there's about $1 trillion of unpaid taxes because of fraud every single year. And the political part of that, that I don't want to go down that rabbit trail is, yeah, but what about the government taking money from us? Two wrongs don't make a right. The point is that there are businesses and there are individuals that are adding up to about $1 trillion in unpaid taxes because of fraud every single year. That means they're withholding it, they're cheating numbers, they're fudging books, cooking the books, whatever you want to call it. I find it also interesting. DP, do you have this picture here to put up? It's not just the IRS that's corrupt, but DP is going to show you a picture here. You may recognize this mug here in a little bit. That's all right. We have time. I mean, we run into criminals all the time, and sadly, I think you guys will recognize this criminal. There we go. So this little gentleman was dropped off at my house yesterday with his cohort, Xander. So Cameron's in one side and Xander's in the other side. So there's all kinds of criminal stuff going on here, but look at that mug shot. Isn't that terrible? They talk about these these escapees, these prisoners that get out. Here's one that, look at that face. You don't want to run into this guy in a dark alley, I'll tell you what. A reward, yeah. Yeah, there probably is. Do you have one of Xander, or you don't put that one up? That's all right. Xander busted. Look at that. It's terrible. This is what shows up at my house yesterday. So our scripture today, we'll go back into the slide here. I'm just letting them. I have no control. Jesus, take the wheel. We went all the way back to the beginning. You guys want to sing these songs again? I know. Good free help is hard to find. All right, there we go. So our scripture today, and we're talking about righteousness, the importance of doing righteousness and doing what's right. Terry prayed for that this morning, right? That God, let us do what's right. Every single day, let us do what's right. You guys know me by now. I love the foundation. I used to, when I traveled a lot, I would ask people, what is God's foundation? And inevitably, almost every time, people would say, it's love. God's foundation is love. That's not true. That's not God's foundation. Other people would say Jesus Christ. Christ is the foundation. Or the cross is God's foundation. None of those are true. Psalm 89:14 says that righteousness and justice are God's foundation. And then His steadfast love flows from it. It flows from that foundation of righteousness, which that term, I preached on this for a long time, that term for righteousness in Psalm 89:14 is a term for balancing scales. It means literally, very literally, righteousness means using balanced scales. That means you don't tip the scale one way or the other, either bad or good. You don't tip those scales for people. I found this interesting. What's the guy's name? He played Hyde on that 70s show. He was just convicted for some really serious charges. Yeah, Masterson. So he's got a 30 to life sentence in prison. 30 years to life. What was fascinating to me and really disappointing was that Ashton Kutcher and his wife, who also co-starred with him on the show, wrote glowing letters of character to the judge. And the news sources actually obtained the letters that they wrote, and it actually made me sick to the stomach. And I was like, these people work with the victims. Like, they actually have an organization and they work with victims of these kinds of crimes. And so they should know that you don't write this glowing letter of character to the person who's going off to prison, and yet they did. And Ashton Kutcher just issued an apology yesterday, but the damage is done. You know what I mean? So tipping the scales, when you tip the scales for somebody, either to get them out of something that they did, or you tip the scales and you make things look really bad for somebody who's innocent, you're tipping the scales. And so God, His foundation begins with a true balance scale. So Proverbs 11 verse 1 says, a false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is His delight. That word for just weight is the same word that's used for righteousness in Psalm 89:14. Isn't that interesting? It very literally means a balanced scale or a just weight. Righteousness, right? A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is His delight. When pride comes in, then comes disgrace. But with the humble is wisdom. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. What does that mean? Riches don't profit in the day of wrath. In the day of wrath, in the day of judgment, in the day when we have to give an account for all that we did, wealth doesn't help you out. All of your life accomplishments, all of your awards, all of your trophies, everything that you have hanging up on your shelf, none of that matters. None of it matters. And so people work so hard to attain all these riches and all this wealth and to accumulate it, and they have shortcuts, and we look at what's happening with the IRS, all the people who are cheating the government out of tax money, all the fraud that's happening out there. People are cheating, cutting corners to pad their pockets. And God very clearly is saying, that's not going to cut it. Using unbalanced scales, tipping the scale, cheating people out of money, lying to people, deceiving people, none of that's going to help you on the day of judgment. Riches don't profit. I don't care how rich you are. I don't care how many accomplishments you've made. It does not profit in the day of wrath. But righteousness delivers from death. I'm going to read on. That's all I have up on the slides. I'm going to read on starting in verse 5. The righteousness of the blameless keeps his way straight, but the wicked falls by his own wickedness. Again, this term righteousness keeps coming up. Righteousness, balanced scales, the person who's honest, the person who doesn't cheat people, who doesn't cut corners, that's what matters to God. In the end, our work ethic as Christians, what really matters is not how much we accumulate, whether that's monetary, actual money, goods, possessions, or the size of your church, right? We talked about that in class this morning. A lot of people look to that as like this glowing accomplishment. Like, look what we did as Christians. We built this massive church. We built this following from nothing. In the end, God says, but if you're not righteous, it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter to you. What matters is your work ethic as a Christian, is your integrity, your honesty, the way that you treat other people. Your kindness matters to God. The righteousness of the blameless keeps his way straight, but the wicked falls by his own wickedness. Verse 6. The righteousness of the upright delivers them, but the treacherous are taken captive by their lust. When the wicked dies, his hope will perish. And the expectation of wealth perishes too. Isn't that interesting? The wicked person, when he dies, his hope is gone. How many people have false hope? I saw an interesting thing the other day. It was somebody going around interviewing people, and he was just asking people, like, do you think you're going to heaven? When you die, do you think you're going to heaven? And it was kind of fascinating to watch people's response. And there was, like, every single person who was interviewed hesitated. And the majority of people, you want to know what they said? It's kind of predictable, I think, but they said, what? Yeah, I'm going. And then he asked another important question. Why do you think that you would go to heaven when you die? Another long hesitation, and the majority of people said, well, I'd like to think that I'm a good person. That's what they're banking their hope in. I'd like to think that I'm a good person. None of the people said, well, I know that my salvation is assured because I've repented of my sins, because I've put Christ on in baptism, because my salvation is assured in Jesus Christ, because Christ died for me. None of the people said that. It was all, well, yeah, I guess I would go to heaven because I would like to think that I'm a good person. And this isn't the only verse in the Bible that says, maybe you're not quite so sure, and if you're really a wicked person, it doesn't matter. Your fate is sealed. Right? If you're not a righteous person, if you're a wicked person, when you die, your hope is gone. That hope of going to heaven, it's gone. The minute you die, the second you die, that hope is gone. And it always blows my mind why people wait and wait and wait, and they don't want to hear about Christianity, they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to entertain it, they don't want to, just don't bother me with that right now. That always blows my mind because death is inevitable for all of us. And the Bible is pretty clear, when the wicked dies, his hope will perish, and the expectation of wealth perishes too. All this stuff that you worked your whole life for, it doesn't matter once you're dead. The righteous is delivered from trouble, and the wicked walks into it instead. With his mouth, the godless man would destroy his neighbor, but by knowledge the righteous are delivered. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices. And when the wicked perishes, there are shouts of gladness. You ever experience that? When somebody dies, and I'm not talking about like, somebody who's just, they didn't know Christ, but they were kind of a nice person. I'm not talking about that person. I'm talking about, did you ever experience, maybe you didn't know them personally, but you know of somebody. When they die, people are happy. Because that person was a tyrant. And they did nothing but agitate people and abuse people. And they were just a horrible, horrible person. This is fascinating. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices. And when the wicked perishes, there are shouts of gladness. By the blessing of the upright, a city is exalted. But by the mouth of the wicked, it is overthrown. Whoever battles his neighbor lacks sense, but a man of understanding remains silent. I think it's just important, and that's the message for today. It's not a complex message. In the end, righteousness wins. Treating people well, treating people with kindness, going out to your neighbor. It's not about, like, how do I become the best church in town, right? A lot of Christians get caught up in that stuff. How do we become the best church, the biggest church, the most well-known church, the best website, the best worship team, or whatever? Like, people get caught up in this stuff, and they forget that in the end, righteousness is what matters, both to God and to other people. Righteousness matters. Help us to do what's right. And that ought to be our daily prayer. That's my prayer today, that God teach us and show us to do what's right, to treat people with fairness and kindness, to not be thrown in the back of police cars and dropped off at their parents' houses. There is a good story behind that. I'll let Cameron and Xander tell their own story about how they wound up in the back of a police car. But do what's right. Ask God to help you, to give you wisdom, to give you the eyes to see, to help people in need, to find people who are struggling. The same officer who dropped my son off yesterday told me, I don't know if it was this weekend or last weekend, but she said, I got a call, and it was because somebody called the police, they called us, on a homeless person who was going through one of those bins, the clothing drop-off. You see them all over town. She said somebody was going through that. It was pouring down rain. This homeless person was soaked to the bone. And they reached in and they were grabbing clothes out. And she said, you know what my thought was? I'm like, probably the same thought that I had. Instead of calling the police on this person, why don't you help them out? She said this person was probably reaching in there to try to find dry clothes. And yeah, they're not supposed to reach into these bins and just take clothes. But she's like, let me ask you a question. If you were out on the street and you were soaking wet, what would you do? In the end, righteousness wins the day. God is watching us, and not only God, but other people are watching us. Help us to do what the next right thing is. That's my message today. If there's anybody who's not yet taken that step to put Christ on a baptism and you're ready, we're ready for you. If you have prayer needs, you can come up as we all stand and sing this song together.